Order. It is now 5:37, and we now have a quorum. I'm going to call roll at this point in time, and what I'm going to do is ask everyone here to give just a little bit of their own background about their involvement in the city, their involvement in other types of community activities, either here or elsewhere. If they want to give something about their own personal profile, that's fine as well. But I know that we haven't had a lot of opportunity to get to know each other. Some of the new members are new to us, and some of the old members are probably new to you. So Ken, would you start us off?
Sure. My name is Ken Guenthner. In formal capacity, I'm currently serving as the commissioner representing Corcoran on the Elm Creek Watershed Commission. I'm a past mayor and city council member in the city of Corcoran. Began serving on the city council in 1997, and then served off and on, had one tenure and then took some time off and had another tenure after that, and then retired from city council in 2016. During a 2-year gap, I was actually on the Charter Commission and served as its chair, and that was about in the 2005-06 timeframe. Kids attended Wayzata schools. I've been a youth coach in Corcoran and Wayzata school activities, and that's about it. Retired a couple of years ago, so.
Attorney in private life?
Yeah, retired.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'm Randy Farian, very new to this whole process. We've lived for, I guess it's been 2 years now, over in the Bass Lake Crossing and my home development right around the corner from us here. Grew up in New Hope as a teen and early adulthood, and after I was married, my wife and I lived in Plymouth since 1975, in 2 different houses in the northeast near Bass Lake in that area. And as our kids left home, decided to downsize into a more convenient home here in the Corcoran area. Looking forward to making this our last home residence. So, and I'm anxious to learn about city government and see what input I can provide as a citizen.
Okay.
My name is Jonathan Coots. I, too, am new to city government as well. I've called Minnesota home for the last 12 years. I've called Corcoran home. We're going on year number 3 now. Prior to that, I lived in Plymouth. We have 4 children, and so far we have 1 Wayzata High graduate, and the other 3 in the next 12 years or so will graduate from there as well. We moved out here to Corcoran, also because of the things we love about the city. That's also one of the reasons why I was so interested in joining the Charter Commission. My professional capacity, I also navigate contracts. So understanding complex issues and trying to understand bias and understand where you can drive win-win situations is, I think, a skill set I can bring to this group. Thank you.
Thanks. My name is Phil Christensen, and I moved to Corcoran with my wife and kid probably 4, maybe 5 years ago now. We have 3 kids now. I have served on the Parks Committee for probably 3 years, maybe 4 years, something like that. And I've been on the Charter Commission for the same length of time, although we don't meet as often. So we are looking forward to sticking around in Corcoran for quite some time, and just want to be involved as much as I can help.
I'm Jerry Tucker. Randy and I are neighbors.
Yes.
We live kind of catty corner from each other in Bass Lake Crossing. I've lived here in Corcoran for 19 months now. In Minnesota for 28 years. My wife and I have 2 grown sons and wonderful daughters-in-law and 4 grandkids. And Bass Lake Crossing is going to be our age-in-place home. They're taking me out in either a body bag or a gurney, so I'm not going anywhere. So, and I'm delighted to be here because I'm retired. I've been retired for 9 years now, and I want to get involved and see what I can do to help.
My name's Dan Buchholz. In my professional capacity, I've lived in Corcoran for a little over a year. We moved in right during the pandemic, start of the pandemic, and so we haven't had an opportunity to meet as many people as we would like. But we live on Meadowview Drive, northwestern Corcoran, and I'm very familiar with Corcoran. In my professional capacity, about 9 years ago, I was the city administrator for Hanover, and so we had good working relationships. I'm currently the city administrator in Spring Lake Park. Very passionate about local government. Thought that this would be a good use of my skill set and knowledge. And in my 20-year career in local government, I haven't ever really worked with a charter before. I was an intern in Moorhead. That's the only city that I've worked in with a charter, so I thought that this would be an interesting exposure for me too, and a learning opportunity, and I guess that's it.
Okay. I'm George Gamak. I was first born and raised in Corcoran for quite a number of years. Quite a number of years ago. Goes back to the Truman administration. So, first got involved in the city in 1981 as a planning commissioner, served a couple of years there, and then was elected to city council. Off and on, I've had 20 years of council service, and meanwhile have been on the charter commission and doing volunteer work as a firearm safety instructor for about the last 16 or 17 years here. Professional life, I'm retired. I still do some consulting to cities and counties, mostly on compensation-related matters. Just a little bit. Don't do a lot. Don't try to get any new clients. So I'm here basically to provide my input based on experiences which are pretty significant in terms of other cities and other counties and their experiences. So with that, I think we're ready to have the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we have an agenda that's been prepared by staff. Is there anything that anyone would like to add or change on the agenda at this point in time? Yes.
May I ask, there was no formal roll call to say who is present, who is not present?
I think we sort of figured that out, didn't we, by virtue of all of the people that are here? We can certainly do that.
Maybe Jessica could do it for the recording.
Yep. for
Sure.
Recording,
Sure, we'll do it for the record.
Ken Gunther, Randy Farian, Jonathan Coots, Philip Christensen, Jerry Tucker, Dan Buchholz, and George Gamak.
And then identify who's not with us.
And then tonight, who is not with us is, we do not have Jim Tilbury, Brian Lothar, Megan Hibbard, Dan Haskinson, and Scott Gilliard.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, anyone have any comments on the agenda, would like to add anything?
I move approval.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so we'll follow the agenda. Open forum. Is there anyone here for open forum? We have an audience of 3 people.
We don't have anyone, anyone can raise their hand. Otherwise, we do have a few members of the public on our call. Anyone wishing to do open forum can press *9 if you're on a phone. Otherwise, click reactions and raise your hand. Wait just a moment, but currently no one is raising their hand.
Okay. Okay, so it's noted that we have no requests for open forum comments. Approval of the minutes. Do we have a motion on the minutes?
So moved.
Okay.
Second?
A motion, second. If anyone need any time to comment? I assume everybody's had a chance to read the minutes?
Yep.
Okay. All in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. Okay. Unfinished business. I guess I would say that we had some discussions previously that we could technically refer to as unfinished business, but it's all listed under new business, so I think we're fine with that. Okay? Review of correspondence.
Thank you, Chair. We did not receive any correspondence this year
Okay?
related to the charter.
Okay. Next item is commissioner term update. And we have a memo in here that lists the members.
Yes.
Jonathan's name.
Jonathan is missing, however, that his appointment was on Monday, so.
Okay, so-
November,
Congratulations.
should have been November 8th.
So we are showing 12 members currently on the list, 3 with terms that expire in 2022, 1 expires in 2023, 1 expires in 2025, and the remainder expire in 2025, later in the year, in October. So I don't know how we ended up with the split in the year.
It's been, depending on the chief judge, they do think, there has been, I've noticed in my tenure that they've had slightly different appointment timelines and styles. So sometimes they will, I think they like to stagger, make sure that we're staggered somewhat, but some
Yeah.
appoint the date
Okay.
of oath.
All right. Any comments or questions on the commissioner terms? Okay. Hearing none, we'll move on to the next item. Annual report to the district court judge, and I noted you had a memo in here,
Yes. Thank you, Chair.
and it's basically referencing the fact that we have a website that shows the details.
The packet and what would have been.
And that has, I assume, been sufficient in prior years?
Yes, that's what we've been submitting, at least for the last several.
Okay. We probably should have a motion on that.
Sure. Yes.
So anybody like to move that we submit the report?
So moved. Second.
Okay. Motion's been made and seconded. Any comments? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so that passes. On to the next item. 2021 annual meeting date. I think are we referring to 2022 annual meeting date there? Should that say 2022? Is the intent of the staff
September 9th?
on 7,
Oh.
Yes.
7,
Yes, I apologize, that was.
D, that should say 2022.
Yes. Sorry, the staff report has,
That was a carryover.
that was unintentional.
So are there any particular dates that we're suggesting for next year?
We're suggesting September 9th for 2022 for our annual meeting. This puts it before the election, where staff gets There's lots going on during the election.
Can you say that date again?
September 9th.
September 9th.
Thursday is September 9th at 5:30 PM. So that's our proposal, but certainly open to the commission if there's another date that would work better. It seems to give some flexibility on it.
I can imagine that we all have, September 9th still open on our calendars at this point in time.
And
Unless we're traveling somewhere.
I do appreciate the commission's flexibility due to the timing of some of the appointments. That's why we weren't able to hold our meeting when we had originally intended last year.
Okay.
I'm just now looking at my calendar on my phone, and September 9th is a Friday.
Oh.
Did you mean September 8th?
Good.
Because I ain't gonna be here on a Friday.
Yeah, no, we don't want it to be a Friday.
One question in that regard, too, is whether
Oh,
the
the
commission...
8th.
I think it's worth discussing, too, for the commission, whether it should schedule on a night other than a council night, so that there isn't sort of an inherent time limitation on the meeting and discussion. It's just a thought. When there's no business, it doesn't matter. If you've got business, then it matters a lot, and you end up having to schedule more meetings.
Yeah, that's a good point. Are there any other nights of the week that generally work well for people or don't work for people?
Mondays don't work for me, but,
So like a Tuesday or Wednesday, maybe? Would Tuesdays be try a Tuesday that week?
The
Tuesday, the
6th.
6th.
Tuesday, the 6th, that would be the day after Labor Day, so just,
Oh, then I won't be.
Oh. Yeah, can we push it to the
Well, we-
Wednesday? Would the Wednesday still be,
Or push it back to the 13th.
yeah, we could certainly push it back to the 13th.
13th.
which would also, okay. Yeah, that would make sense.
That's fine.
So current proposal is September 13th. Anyone want to make that a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. It's been made and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so we're set for September 13th of 2022. The next item is discussion on implementation of award system. That was a fairly lengthy discussion at the last meeting with joint meeting of the council involved in that process. And we sort of left it open-ended at that time because we were in the process of finding out a little bit more information about our census. Has there been any new census information delivered to the city recently?
Besides the count, but we have not received a redistricting or any of that information related to that.
Okay.
You're not going to see that until probably February.
Generally February of the 2 years after the census.
They've got a really truncated timeline for the legislature to try and come up with a redistricting plan, and if not, then it goes to the courts. So I think they're looking at implementation. It'll be fairly close to the primary.
Perhaps we could just have a little bit of discussion about that topic for some of the newer members who may not be familiar with the discussion and why it was even brought up in the first place. And I think we have some members who have felt that with the changes in the demographics of the community, particularly as development occurs, that we start to get into a situation where we have somewhat different needs and perspectives, perhaps, on operations of the community. And some communities would look at that as a situation where you might want to ensure that you have representation from the various areas of the community so that populated areas and less populated areas would have a voice in the city council. That was a concern, I think, and part of it had to do with the fact that there's always the fear that, new members coming into the community are going to soon outnumber the folks that have been there a while and perhaps change rules that would be adversely impacting the existing property owners. I think that's part of it. There are other reasons as well. One of those cited is that it becomes very expensive to run for city council because of the numbers of households that one would have to reach. So it's almost like running for a state representative. You're starting to get a population that's quite large, particularly, where you need to reach out to people by mail and doing, other kinds of methods to reach people. So that's been an argument for it. Argument against it is that we'd be constantly chasing redistricting, because as we experience growth, we are, going to have a need to realign boundaries. And so you could very easily have council members who are providing very good service, and all of a sudden their house is moved in with another council member. And you wouldn't be able to, both serve at the same time. So that presents an issue. Ken, you've been involved in that discussion. Do you want to add some things to it?
Well, I think the discussion really started about 4 years ago, just in anticipation of the community growing. A couple of things I would, maybe for the benefit of, I do recall a number of the council members had lived either in Plymouth before, or may have lived in communities that currently have a ward system, so as a voter, they've experienced that, and they might already know a little bit about it. But some of the fundamentals are that the wards have to have, as practically reasonable as possible, equal population. So it's not the case that you can just create geographic barriers and then have unequal populations electing council members from those areas. So that's why it's a function that in the state statute is triggered by the census and redistricting. And I know in the state statute there are some time frames based on when redistricting occurs. For communities that are transitioning to a ward system, you have to determine the wards and do that within a fairly defined time frame, pretty well set forward in the state statute.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Does that necessarily mean that the ward boundaries are changed regularly, or does it depend every 10 years on the census?
Yeah, that's a good question, and my understanding, and I want to preface this with the fact that, I've read this stuff myself, but I'm not here, as a rep from the League of Cities or somebody who practiced municipal law or anything like that. But I don't see anything in the statute that allows cities to readjust boundaries between census. So one of the discussions, and it's a significant part of the discussion, is how do cities time that conversion to a new system? When within that 10-year window from census to census does it occur, and what are the implications of doing it, say, right away in the 10-year window, late in the 10-year window, that type of thing. And I haven't seen anything, and Jessica can comment too, that suggests that there's a mechanism. If a city, for example, or a commission wanted to adopt a ward system and you went through the process whereby you amend the charter, there are a couple different ways to do that. But if that occurred in year 8 or 9 of that census decade, you're relying on data that's 8 or 9 years old at that point, which has its obvious flaws, I would say, or concerns maybe, versus, say, making the conversion early in the census decade and knowing that at least at that point in time, you've got, information that can get you into a fairly equal population in the wards. Mm-hmm. So, Anna, just one other comment. When I sort of came to the conclusion that there wasn't a mechanism for adjusting during that period, then I sort of started to wonder, well, how did the other communities around us that have adopted a ward system, when did they pull the trigger, and how did they confront or deal with those types of questions? So obviously a city like Plymouth, which, you might imagine 40 or 50 years ago was a little bit similar to what Corcoran is today. If you think, those of you who have been around the area for quite a while, remember when there wasn't really much west of the freeway. and northwest Plymouth, west and northwest Plymouth was a lot like Corcoran at that point in time. And I don't frankly know when Plymouth went to the ward system, but there might be a little bit of a template there, or maybe some old timers who would have some, perspective on that process.
Okay. Any other comments on it?
I have a question. Since I am a newbie, what's the thinking behind unequal service and representation by not having a ward system?
Well, the situation exists where you have folks that are living in a fairly compact environment who perhaps some of the ordinances that they might prefer to have. One of them might be, for instance, can you discharge a firearm in your backyard? Well, obviously, in your community, that would be an issue. But in other parts of the community, it's perfectly fine. So you could run into a situation where, yeah, go ahead, you can comment.
Say a prime example was after the last election, was 4 of the 5 council members that lived within what? We must live within a quarter mile of each other?
I think it's 3/4 between you and I.
Okay. I mean, it's in that southeast corner.
Yeah.
We technically control the city, to your point.
Yeah, so,
Not to say any of us have an agenda to do so, or would do so, but that's where the thought of unequal representation comes from.
Oh, I understand the thought, but what services and what needs of the residents are not being met that would be met by having a ward system?
I would, maybe my experience would be the difference between living on a paved road, having city sewer and water, and having a lot of people living within a close area versus living on 20 to 40 acres, having large animals, having driven on dirt roads for the entire span of your time in Corcoran, and knowing that as long as you live in Corcoran, it's highly likely you'll never have municipal sewer and water. So those are, I kind of bridge both worlds, because I live less than a mile probably from you, and probably a half a mile from you, but I've got an 11-acre hobby farm and have had horses and all of those types of things. And I'm surrounded by cropland. So I'm kind of right on the edge of that and sort of go both directions in that perspective.
I think one of the fears of landowners, particularly larger landowners who are right on the cusp of development, is that a group might come in and say, you know what, now that we're here, we really think we should slow things down. And there's a fear, I think, on the part of some of those landowners who were maybe looking forward to selling or developing or doing something, that all of a sudden, the majority says, we kind of like Corcoran the way it is, so we are going to draw the line right here, and that's going to be the end of it. So that's one of the fears, I think, that people would have in that kind of situation. The other, of course, would be creating a lot of restrictive ordinances that might unfairly burden people who live on large acreages, animal ordinances that would be overly restrictive, or firearms, or even using ATVs or any kind of other activity that people in more of a rural environment would be comfortable with. Now, having said that, doing a ward system that's equally distributed based on population is still no guarantee that they're going to be treated fairly. There is another argument, and that's saying that all council members and the mayor should be responsible to all citizens, okay? And that's one of the biggest arguments that people make against a ward system, is that if you have ward systems, you can have people saying, well, I'm representing my ward, my people, my constituency. I'm not as responsible to the folks over in this other ward. That's That's Ken's problem, to deal with the people in his ward or somebody else's issues. So there's not a clear answer to that question, I guess, is what I'm saying. I think you have to have good council members and trust the fact that they're going to represent everybody.
Council gets selected every 4 years, correct?
Council are every 4 years, at least that's the way it's currently structured. So there's 2 years, or 2 people elected every 2 years. So you have the
You got some
alternating
rotation.
rotation.
Sure.
And the mayor is every 2 years. Now, the Charter Commission, part of the duties of a Charter Commission are to look at that structure and say, does that work? For instance, we could say, hey, you know what, we need more council members because we have to guarantee that we're getting council members that represent other constituencies, so let's add 2 more. You could do that, and that would be the role of the Charter Commission to initiate that process, okay? I think most communities in our area have stuck with the 5, and that seems to work pretty well.
Yeah, and I do want to mention too, and I saw Jessica included a copy of the charter here, and this actually is all of the iterations of the Corcoran Charter.
Yeah.
And the charter currently in effect is actually the last one in the packet. So you might want to be aware of that so you don't mistakenly read the top copy, which was the actual copy that was adopted in the city in about 87-ish, 88-ish.
Might have been a little later than
Something
that.
like that.
Yeah, it was in early 90s or sometime in there, I think. Yeah.
So,
I did want, but the reason I brought that up is I did want to let people know, George mentioned that the Charter Commission has some oversight with regard to proposals on council structure and size, but our charter also has initiative and referendum in it. So a citizen petition could be brought forward under the guidelines for how those work. If citizens wanted to initiate, say, a change in the council, that type of thing. Similarly, the referendum functions serves for a citizen reversal of an ordinance or something that the council might adopt. A citizen group could always come forward with a petition, and there's a procedure and timing related to how they might want to unwind some sort of ordinance.
Yeah, there was a period in time where there were some conflicts going on within the community, as you can, air the dirty laundry, if we will, I guess. But, it was kind of like an us and them, or, 2 different groups kind of at odds with each other over the direction of the community. And the Charter Commission, I think the judge in his wisdom appointed people from both communities on the Charter Commission. And there were several items brought to the Charter Commission through petitions, but none of the petitions were followed any proper procedures. And they were all rejected by the city clerk after consulting with the attorney. Ken took it upon himself to do a lot of redrafting to simplify the language and clarify the language and take out some of the archaic parts of it.
Yeah, so to build on that a little bit, the interesting thing, we did have a petition drive, and it was in the 2008 sort of time frame, I think. And by way of background, I mean, particularly for the new commissioners, I would say probably the most even more so than a couple of the recent land use decisions in the community. I know there was a somewhat contentious proposal, prior to the last election that got a lot of people motivated and involved. I think prior to that, probably the biggest raw nerve issue in the community really centered around whether we would bring in municipal sewer and water and allow suburban style densities in parts of the city. And there was a real movement across the community in opposition to that. And there was similarly a big part of the community that recognized value in having municipal services and what that might provide in terms of tax base and broader population and diversity of housing stock and that kind of stuff. So one of the things, the petition drive in particular, that took place was a proposal that all rezoning decisions needed to be submitted to the general population for a vote, meaning any rezoning had to be a matter brought before the public in an election. And it was kind of a long wordy petition. They did get a lot of signatures on it, and there were some other things, generally some mom and apple pie stuff, like, I can't remember, reducing taxation or something like that. What was unfortunate, and I really mean this, was that the petition itself had structural defects. And so the law is very clear on the form that a petition has to take in order to trigger the whole process. And when the commission received the petition and gave it to the city attorney to determine that it complied with the requirements for a petition, the city attorney came back pretty quickly and said, no, it's got fatal defects, and you really can't use this to trigger the charter amendment process, which unfortunately I think the proponents didn't appreciate. Well, I know they didn't appreciate it because they viewed that as sort of an institutional snub of what people wanted to do, not recognizing the fact that those requirements also protect the public from misleading or improper petition drives. Okay? The people behind the petition, this is the ultimate irony, were a handful of the people that were prime movers of the original charter. So people that were instrumental in the original drafting and adoption of the first charter were behind that petition, and they submitted a defective petition. So that's a little bit of a story, but that then led to the Charter Commission and the City Council just editing the charter into its current form to make it easier to read, and we then added to the charter the entire Section 7, which was an explanation of how do you amend this thing, thinking that if a group came forward again, at least they could go to the charter itself and find out, how do I amend it, what do I have to do to comply with those requirements. And at that time, I think this was the only amendment to the charter since it was originally, you might be wrong on that, but it was, the amendment was made effective through the process by which the Charter Commission, by majority vote, submitted it to the council, and then the council approved it by unanimous vote. And that's one of the couple of different methods for amending a charter.
Yeah, there was a lot of work. I think Ken deserves a lot of the credit for that because he really did the writing and did the work on it. The rest of us just had to vote on it.
Well, we did do things, for example, and if you care to go back and take the time, you know, a couple of things were like removing gender-specific pronouns. I mean, you know, just going to general neutral pronouns and that kind of thing, which was just the difference in drafting between the mid-'80s and, you know, the 2000s.
Okay.
So I just have a question. You mentioned, you know, an example, a fear that a large landowner would have that we would potentially change something due to not having a ward system, that majority could effectively implement something that would maybe not be the most advantageous for them to sell their property. So are we discussing the ward system as a tool to address fears of perceived possible future changes? Is that kind of the driver behind that?
I think that's one of the reasons that it was brought forward is the fear that there would be not in my backyard activity in the community.
So
In other words, more limitations on development. In other words, people who were kind of on the borderline, if you will, of development, fearful that it would be dropped off. Now, there's no guarantee the way that lines would be drawn in a ward that you would not still have that same result. I mean, you could still have that because within each rural area, you also have enclaves of people whose developments occurred in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and then currently today we have several developments occurring that, you know, those folks certainly have a different view, if you will. So I think some of those kinds of issues, like the issues of when development proceeds through the city and so forth, is probably not the kind of problem that would be solved by a ward system.
Correct.
It would more likely be solved by having a council that would be amenable to the interests of all of its citizens.
So, well, hold on, but I mean, just, so those fears, and obviously having the mechanism to, I think it was 5%, 10% of the population to drive a petition. So we're saying those fears and the pressure relief valve of that petition is not sufficient enough to protect the minority. So are we saying that the charter is not designed in such a way to protect the minority? So, I mean, because I guess what I'm trying to get at is I don't understand what the idea of the ward system would actually prevent. If the idea is to prevent fear, I don't necessarily know if changing, government policy to address fear is the right move. If we're talking about it addressing something that's real, something that we've seen and systemic, then I think that's the right conversation. But to just, say it's a fear-based decision doesn't seem to make sense.
If you read what some of the experts are telling us, changing a charter is kind of a last resort. That there's a whole lot of other solutions that would happen before that. Number one would be the next election. Okay?
Correct.
George, I wanted, just another observation. The city of Cottage Grove, about 10 years ago, maybe, was considering adopting a charter. And they invited charter commission members from various communities around the Twin Cities to a forum that they held. And I do remember noting at that time that one of the chairs was the chair of the Minneapolis Charter Commission. And that predated a lot of the stuff that they've just gone through. And I actually was acquainted with that gentleman from years past, and so it was very interesting to hear his perspective as chair of the largest, group in the state. But when it came my turn to talk, one of the comments I made was don't sort of believe that a charter or the provisions of the charter is a cure for the woes, all the woes that might affect your community, because actually the charter doesn't come into play very much at all. It comes into play infrequently. The best remedy for the woes that might beset your community are good elections, good candidates. The best insurance that a community has is to elect good council members. And so and George and I have been on enough different councils over the years, so we could name off some great council members, and we can name some really crummy council members.
We won't name them real quick.
And I think that exists everywhere. To me, it's not quite as pointed as, well, what are the hot button issues, and can we predict how councils might fall on those hot button issues? It's more, what are the perspectives that the council members bring to the discussion, so that, it's, I always really valued having folks that might live, at least back then, in the more developed neighborhoods that were kind of the acre and a half lot developments that kind of dot the community. And I also really valued having council members who were either farmers or lived on the 80-acre or 200-acre parcels or whatever. The idea was to get a good mix of that, and I always felt that served the community best. And so maybe, to the extent that some of this proposal to go to a ward system, obviously I've been involved in talking about it. I think it's the right thing. I want to sort of temper my advocacy. I'm proposing it, frankly, and I would support it. I'm a little careful about how much I'm going to advocate for it, because the community as a whole needs to decide if that's right for it. But I think part of the reason, if I have a bias, it's because I saw the benefit of having a broad spectrum of those perspectives just coming to the table on whatever the question was. Whether it was something that really now would simply have impact really in the more dense neighborhoods, or if it's something that would really impact only areas in western Corcoran that are, outside of the MUSA service area.
In appreciating that exposure to that experience, at the same time, I would say any prospective city council member or mayor, conversely, I would actually want them to go out and canvas, if you will, in the area they're not from. So if they're from a more rural setting, I would want them to go to a more suburban setting and vice versa. I would not want a candidate to sit there and say, my neighborhood, and that's all I care about. I don't care about anybody else. And they're gonna get their canvassing done in 2 days. And they're not gonna really care about, somebody who might be in a rural setting if they're from a suburban area. And somebody who is running in a more rural area, they might have to spend weeks, again, because of the distance between properties, right? So then we put an undue burden on those people running for council as well, because we're not effectively creating equal chairs in that regard from the work that's anticipated in it. We also have the potential to increase, generalized costs. And what's going to happen when maybe there is a city council member that sits in one zone and is approached by a concerned citizen from another? While I'm sure they will be absolutely polite and respectful, at the end of the day, that is not necessarily the people they're representing. So if there's even a perceived idea that that's not effective for the people they represent, they may not be an advocate for it. Though collectively as a whole in the city, it would actually be very appropriate to approach that, because then they would be looking at what's best for the city, not what's best just for their localized region. So again, from my perspective, we're talking about perceived fear and trying to proactively address perceived fear. And that just doesn't really make sense to me as a course of action, right? If there was documented shortcomings that we have identified, if we looked at the historical city council members and mayors and where they had lived over the last 50 years and all this, there's a generalized trend that certain areas have not been represented, right? If there's a specific space in Corcoran where, hey, these people are just not represented. Again, I would also argue in that case, well, what's that underlying cause of that? Is there an underlying cause of that? But just to arbitrarily say that we want to base a potential decision of this size off of perceived fear of landowners and large landowners at that. And I have no idea how many of them there are actually in the city of Corcoran, and I don't necessarily know how we designate what constitutes a large landowner. Is it 5 acres? Is it 500 acres, right? That very small population could then utilize this as a tool to help redraw wards to try to drive their potential agenda as well. Where does that influence then rest? So I guess I'm just trying to say is from a fear-based perspective, it doesn't make sense to me. I just don't understand.
I think the concept of fear is being over pushed here, because I think what we're really talking about is more in line with what Ken is saying, is that when he was mayor, he valued the perspectives of people with different experiences. And when you do have a large population growth, as we've experienced in one area, and let's say you just assume that your folks that are going to be running for council are going to be somewhat representative of the population, you might find that most of your candidates are coming from the high population areas because there aren't enough people out in the other areas that are, quite frankly, interested. You'd be lucky to get 1 or 2. So the issue is one of, it's almost like when you have a council, you almost have to have the perception of the public that the public thinks that at least one of those members or maybe 2 of them can relate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm not sure where I land on wards. It's something I want to think about a little bit more, but, I've seen it where it's worked real well, where you've gotten broad representation from various parts of the community. And I've also seen it where, and the city of Blaine is a perfect example, where a couple of years ago, the mayor blasted the council members in a Star Tribune article, because when they would have work sessions about a topic that was in a particular ward, some of the council members in the other wards wouldn't attend the workshop, and so they had trouble getting quorum. So you have that, that provincial thinking there sometimes that makes it real tough to have a decision that just is in one ward area. But I also understand that, when the city gets to eventual full population, having at-large council members running around trying to get, talk to, 30,000 people or however many is going to be very difficult. and very expensive to do. So a breakup of that. In Corcoran, you're going to see wards that are going to look like similar to Minneapolis, or excuse me, it's Minnesota, where you have the 3rd congressional and the 4th congressional is very small geographic, which is Minneapolis and St. Paul, or you have the 7th and 8th, which is a huge geographic area. Former U.S. Representative Colin Peterson was a pilot, and he would fly around the district because that was the only way he could get around it in an equal way. So there's all kinds of pros and cons in that. Some cities have addressed that concern about the provincialization by having an at-large council member that runs citywide, and then the mayor obviously runs citywide, so they have that. So then you have 2 people that you could talk to, your ward person and then the at-large and the mayor, so they potentially have 3, so.
And again, I do like your point, though, of having at least one person with your view, right? So if you have that one person from your ward, in theory, they should have similar interests, unless they don't. And so if that's the only person you're able to vote for, and you don't share the interests of that representation, then you have no representation at the city council.
You hope you'd have people running against each other so you can make a choice.
Well, right, again,
You'd
making
hope.
a choice, but again, if you vote for somebody who then does not get in, and that's the only person effectively representing your ward, then as a citizen, you might not feel represented. Now, as the current system happens, I think we voted for 3 seats last year. So everybody effectively had 3 opportunities to have at least one person that they felt represented them come into the city council. And so even if only one person that you voted for came onto the city council, that person becomes the voice, for you, that's that focal point. So again, with the ward system, I could see that potentially causing people to be disillusioned with representation at the city council if who they vote for regularly does not get on the council. So again, we talk about representation, that might disenfranchise a number of people unintentionally.
Okay.
Well, that's another reason that I think there are hybrid systems. I mean, there are a lot of cities that simply have wards. Minneapolis, it's the only path to the council. And then there are cities like Corcoran where everybody's at large, and then there are cities that might have, say, 4 wards, 2 at large, or whatever the combination turns out, 3 and 1, or 3 and 2, or whatever. And that goes back to a discussion of what's the right size, and, does the mayor vote on all matters or only break ties? You sort of go through a lot of that analysis. And those might be things, too, that depending on how
Sure.
the population of the city, something might not make
Okay.
sense for a city.
So I want to make sure that we have everybody get an opportunity to ask questions or make comments on this before we move on, but anybody else?
I just wanted to add, I looked at several articles online about the pros and cons of ward systems and stuff, and very honestly, it looks to me like it's 6 of one and a half dozen of the other. There's certainly advantages and disadvantages. Corcoran looks to me, and like I say, growing up first in New Hope and then in Plymouth, we were always on the edge of where the northwest metro area was. And we saw it just kind of pass us up and go on. And that's exactly what's happening here too. I mean, we see where we are at Bass Lake Crossings. We're on the edge, but we aren't going to be on the edge 10 years from now. It's going to change. And I do see some advantages to having geographically a better representation by a ward system. And again, I can see the pros and cons both ways. I'm kind of undecided on it myself right now. The question I have is, the veteran commissioners, are they leaning one direction or the other? Do you have an idea of where that sits?
I don't think that there's a strong advocacy. You heard what Ken had to say. He's in favor of it, but he's not pushing it. And I think, I don't want to speak for any of the other veteran folks. Personally, I'm kind of, in your court because I read both sides, and I understand that there's pros and cons. I'm not sure at this time we've experienced any significant negatives associated with the way things are running. I think if we had a situation where we experienced negatives, there would be greater motivation to look at it at that point in time. So I think as long as we have good council members, and the council members are representing the city as a whole, I don't see the urgency. If we run into a situation where the council members are being very parochial in their approach and they're not representing the entirety of the city, then that would be a solution.
I guess I agree with that, and I think you're right for the climate that we're in right now, that's exactly right. And my only fear against the award system is that the Charter Commission is going to be chasing boundaries from here on out. If the city were to go that direction. That'd be a topic of every single.
It's an
annual
expensive
meeting.
process. It's an expensive process for staff. A lot of time, a lot of effort on their part to try to best align the community. And then, as you do have growth, and if it tends to be concentrated in areas that have already been equalized, you're going to have a period of time where you're going to have lack of equal representation,
Yep.
which is a concern as well. I remember a time when the Senate district in Minnesota here that included Corcoran went all the way to Brooklyn Park, included Brooklyn Park, Maple Grove, Dayton, Rogers, Hassan, parts of Plymouth, all in the same district. And there were over 100,000 people in that district. That's a lot of people. And, then it was redistricted after the census in 1990.
I think one possible, the sitting commissioners have the slight benefit of having had the conversation over the span of a couple of years. So they might have maybe fewer technical questions. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but one thought is to make sure that whatever technical questions people have on how it works, what can or can't be done, sort of percolate up. So, it's easy to envision pretty much this group. I can't remember how this group changes over the upcoming year, but it's going to be pretty much the same group of people a year from now, or in September. And if this conversation gets revisited, can everybody be at least a little more informed over the mechanics or what can or can't happen? And I think it would be worthwhile to try and get some input or feedback from people, say in Plymouth or some of the other communities, that both from an administrator's perspective, what did it involve to go through this? But also, it's hard because I don't know any communities that may have recently adopted a award system. They probably haven't for quite a while. But it would be interesting to get a little bit of that perspective.
One other piece too is that it's not just as easy as putting in language in here saying we're moving to a award system, because there's a lot of things missing in the charter regarding the government and structure of the city that the ward system may end up transitioning. So you're going to end up putting in a lot of other language in here, such as, do we have just all council members from wards, or do we have an at-large council member? Those are all governance things that are going to need to get put into this charter, as well as just the ward system itself.
Yeah, I had, again, in all honesty, I had thought about providing sort of a template for a system, just to give people something to look at, and sort of, it's a little easier when you have a specific scenario in place and you can kind of debate the pros and cons of that scenario. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought it might be appropriate at the point in time when this community does increase the council to, say, 6 council members, and then you would have presumably 4 wards and 2 at large, so you're blending, and then the mayor is the 7th member, and all members vote on all matters. So in effect, you've got 3 at-large votes and 4 individual ward votes on a council. And at what point point of population do you expand from 4 to 6 council members? And is there a little bit of a historical record in the area for the communities that have a larger council? And, why did they do that?
There's another argument that's actually in favor of wards. We talked about it in terms of the expense and the time required to run for office. And having an at-large, when your community gets to be 15, 20,000 people, that's a pretty expensive process. And if you're talking about having volunteers, that volunteer is then faced with getting financial support and doing some other things that are beyond. There's the risk when anytime your elections are based on the amount of finances that somebody might put into it, you have the risk that special interest groups might begin to target that community. It could be a developer, it could be who knows what, that wants to get their people on a council, and they can certainly have an influence in that process through assisting with elections. And, Corcoran, I think, it's sort of coming out of being a sleepy little town where, we didn't have significant amount of effort associated with running for office other than maybe sending a letter out to people, and that would be it. But when you're looking at today's types of elections and the amount of effort and expense needed to do it, it freezes out a lot of people that might otherwise be interested in serving. And that's, I think, one of the advantages of sort of dividing up the community into smaller lots. The model Ken is talking about would allow that, but you'd still have 3 members who would be running at large.
Yeah. Say, George, I think there's still a lot of discussion and education to do on this, and in light of the time.
Yeah.
Yes, I was just gonna.
We do have one item on our agenda that I think makes a lot of sense, that probably is going to be very controversial, and I'd really like to see us talk about it, and that's the dual representation issue. And we had a recent issue, we've never defined clearly whether council members could or should serve as charter commission members or vice versa. And in the past, we've had situations where someone who was on the charter commission was elected to the council, or council member might have been, no, I don't think we've had it the other way around, but they've tended to resign, but it's never been a stated rule. And frankly, I was charter commission chair and then ran for mayor, and when I won the election, then I resigned the charter commission because I just didn't think it was appropriate, but there was no formal prohibition on that. And so we had a recent, a year or whatever after the last election where there was a question whether council members could or should serve on the charter commission, and it just struck me at the time that it would be so easy to remedy that by adopting a one-sentence amendment to the charter indicating that we will not allow dual representation. The state law allows that dual representation, but it also allows the charter to prohibit it if the community chooses.
I did some research on that as well. One of the articles I found that was somewhat helpful, and you all might want to look this up on the web. There's an organization, it's called the National Civic League. Been around a long time. I think Teddy Roosevelt was one of the founders of it, but it's a small group, and they do things to help promote democratic process. But they're saying that dual representation is not a good idea, that if you're a member of the council, if you're elected to the council, you should drop off the commission. The idea is to try to get as broad a representation of the public as possible, and council members serving on the commission are not advised.
I would just say that I agree with that. If there's a body that has oversight over another, being on both bodies is by definition a conflict of interest, right?
Yeah.
So I absolutely do agree with that assessment as well.
And this is one of those I would think we can certainly survey, it'd be worth surveying the current council too, on this regard, because this is the type of amendment that we could make by the commission and the council voting to do it. The council vote would have to be unanimous. Otherwise, we have to put it on the ballot at the next general election. And there's nothing wrong with that either. But if it's something that makes a lot of sense and it's hard to imagine who would want to oppose that, then we might want to explore the mechanism of having it submitted to vote here, submitted to the council, and we'd probably want to survey them first to find out if they're going to support it, so we don't waste Jessica's time.
Let's sort of poll,
If we approve it, it goes on the ballot.
Yeah.
If the council does not unanimously.
let's poll the membership here and see if they would agree with that, because then we could direct
We
the
could-
process
yep.
forward and get it moving. Anyone would like to comment on it, one way or the other?
I support that language addition. I think that, the Charter Commission, from a overall governance standpoint, is kind of a check on the council, and if you have council members on there, it's going to, it creates that inherent conflict of interest that I think is an issue. So I would recommend whatever direction we need to do. If it's having staff draft something, I'm willing to draft something and, for the commission to look at too. It doesn't matter to me, but I'm in favor of it.
I'm in favor.
I am too.
Same here.
Conflict of interest.
Yep.
So can we have a motion to direct the drafting of
Yeah,
that?
I would move that we direct staff to draft an amendment to the charter wherein simultaneous representation on the Charter Commission and the City Council is prohibited.
Second?
Okay, and just a procedural question, if it's that simple, can we approve that and have it submitted to the council, or do we need to get the language back, Jessica, and then have this group actually approve that specific language?
That is a great question.
Because we might need to reconvene to vote
I
on
believe we
that.
probably want to
Yeah.
reconvene for that.
We need,
so
we
can
need,
go
we
ahead
needed the
and-
city attorney probably to
But-
review that.
Confirm.
And this is just in support of the motion, maybe. If it's the case that we can survey the council and they all say, we agree and we will essentially informally commit to voting for this, and we know they'll do it unanimously, then we can just reschedule this group for a quick 5-minute meeting to approve that precise language, and then it just goes to the council. There's really no timing.
It's not what I would consider to be an urgent timeline
Right,
thing. It could
right.
be prepared for passage at the next
Whenever.
annual meeting.
Yep.
Yeah.
Can certainly
Question.
look at that.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. Ken, you're just talking about Charter Commission, City Council. What about Parks and Trails? What about Planning Commission?
I'm not aware that that's ever come up as a challenge. Hadn't really considered it.
Would there be an opportunity to maybe, again, we're coming up against time, maybe turn this into another commitment of a working session to kind of go through all of that, the Charter Commission, the council, the various planning commissions?
Yeah, I think the other commissions really, at this point in time, it's up to the council how they deal with that. But
Okay.
I think if we deal with ours,
Okay,
that would be appropriate.
okay.
Any further discussion? We had a second,
We have a
right?
motion and a second on the
Okay,
floor.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay.
Thank you all.
All right, one more item on the agenda, and that's discussion of commission size. I think we're limited by,
We're limited by statute to between 7 and 15 members, and
Yep.
currently, we don't have anything in the charter, so it's whether or not we'd want to continue to look at it, or at a future meeting, we could continue to discuss this. It's
yeah,
certainly up to the-
quite frankly, I don't have a concern about the size so much as I do about the rotation. I think we'd want to try to get into a situation where we're rotating 3, 3, 3, 4, so that we don't have a situation where all of a sudden we have some special interest group that packs the court, so to speak. Now, I'm not
It's not
saying
even
that
so
that's
much,
going on.
it's not even so much a special interest group. It's just, in 2024,
We could
whatever
have-
year,
yeah.
there's going to be a lot of institutional knowledge that could disappear.
Yeah.
And then you're starting from scratch again, where if you have 3, 3, 3,
Yeah.
then you could.
Yeah, and I don't know-
Retain a good chunk of that throughout. that
Maybe,
continuity.
maybe there's something we could research about that to find out if there's a way to bring that into more of an alignment. The judge probably would have to have something to do with that.
So is there maybe the potential, so for instance, if somebody moves away and they were to leave the council, and let's say they were scheduled to have their term end in October of '25, if you were to do a special seating for that chair, could you then maybe match it to the next, rotation of maybe there's only 2 people that would expire?
I think
Maybe
that's the
next year.
kind of thing we want to try to work through and
Right.
try to figure out.
With the
but
judge.
Yeah.
We're going to have to find out what we can do and what we can't do in that regard. But I think it would be a good idea to pursue that, see if we could equalize these groups a little bit better. Because we have Ken all by himself,
Yeah.
Jim Tilbury all by himself. We need to kind of,
Yeah.
move some other folks into those
Well,
areas.
you could give Jim and me each 3 votes.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Mr. Chair, before we adjourn, I'm just, just looking through the charter here. There's some language about when a referendum would happen and what day the election is. And there was a state law change a few years ago that set specific election dates in statute. So this language may be out of sync with that. So it's something we may want to have staff look at and propose an amendment to. Since we're all talking about
Sure.
amendments, and it's not controversial, it's just a cleanup.
Right.
Right, and I think, can we add that to the task for the staff to look at?
We certainly can look at.
I don't know that we need a motion on that necessarily, but
I think we can.
we should certainly get it into the minutes so that we know that it's being looked at.
Thank you.
Any other discussion, any other questions?
Yeah, a quick one. Are we are we reaching any kind of a conclusion on the ward system?
That seems a little unfinished to me.
I don't know that we are.
Okay.
And we're missing a lot of members here tonight as well.
Okay,
I think we continue to research it.
okay.
Okay.
And like I say, if we have issues in the way the community is being run, it puts a greater urgency behind that. If we don't have those issues, we still probably have some time to deliberate.
So, and I would maybe a little bit of an editorial comment on that. This is the type of policy change that takes a lot of education and a lot of discussion. And frankly, to involve a lot of people all at once in that discussion is a really hard thing to do. And that's why I made the comment earlier. I had given some thought to, preparing a hypothetical, ordinance or whatever and map and demonstrate how that works. But within the confines of how often we meet, the number of new people to the discussion and all of that, I was pretty confident there would be a lot of wheels spinning.
Yeah.
So that's why, I sort of made the suggestion that whatever mechanical questions people might have about how they work or the pros and cons, maybe we get those addressed early on. And I think frankly, maybe in anticipation of this meeting a year from now, we should think about finding other communities that have gone through it and see if there is any expertise or willingness to kind of share their reactions. So we're not just debating pure hypothetical situations.
I think we could actually make an assignment, if you will, to the various members here that are willing to do research, to do web research, call some people, talk to other communities. We might want to coordinate that through staff if you're going to call another community so that we're not all calling the same person. But I think, if you want to talk to someone in another community, check in with Jessica and just let her know. so that if somebody else, if one of the other of you call Jessica, she'll say, well, you know, Dan's already talking to them.
And here's another suggestion or proposal. You know, we're required to have an annual meeting, but that doesn't mean we can't meet more frequently than that. And there's no reason why on this type of topic, this group couldn't try and have a workshop session. And then we work on the agenda in advance through, you know, obviously observing open meeting law requirements, but working through staff to come up with an agenda, and then people can express their interests on, well, what would you want to hear, who would you want to hear from, what questions would you have that could be answered, and do more of a workshop, because that's one of the challenges and limitations of this commission, is we meet once a year without a lot of advanced prep work, and then all of a sudden, we have to talk about an item and then wonder, well, it might be another year before we revisit it. Have we really transitioned to creating a project or determine the work steps so that we can either move forward on it or get it off the plate? And that's why we've been talking about for 4 years, because we've never said, okay, this is what we need to either move forward or get it off the plate.
Okay, we're running up against a time crunch here. I think, I'm hoping that the discussion has been helpful to the new members, at least to get you sort of started to think about it. And maybe the next time around, we can have a little bit more productive result. It's time for adjournment. Somebody want to make a motion?
Move, so moved.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned. And it is now 6:54, okay.
Thank you, George.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you.
I have a bowl of chili waiting for me.
No idea what